Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Rich from richdgmono and this is Record Collector Confessions. I thought I'd start with an update today. I don't know, about a month ago I just got really hardcore back into collecting mode. That has continued. I've been doing quite a bit of buying online, eBay and Discogs. I kind of trashed Discogs in one of my recent videos, but I actually have gotten pretty lucky on Discogs the last few weeks. I'm not getting great deals on there, but I guess the prices are close to fair. So for today though, I thought that we'd address a new topic in Record Collector Confessions, which is about equipment. I've talked about equipment before in the past, but I don't think I've ever really addressed the debate or the contrast between solid state amplification and tube amplification. I've been learning a lot about that lately, thinking about upgrading, maybe actually just switching over from solid state to tube. I think this all pretty much started when I went to New York City about a month ago to visit some friends, and including audio critic Ken McAuliffe. I listened to a bunch of great tube gear at Ken's. I didn't leave there thinking, wow, I gotta get a tube amplifier, oh my god, and I gotta get the appropriate speakers for tube. I left there kind of feeling like I definitely knew the difference between well, we did an original pressing versus reissue shootout, so I definitely felt like I left there knowing the difference between those. I've done a lot of that on my own, but I think I gained a new dimension of understanding of the difference listening on his equipment, which is all tube. So, there was that comparison, but also, we didn't compare tube versus solid state at his place, but just having so much familiarity listening to solid state amplifiers, listening to that tube stuff, it just made the difference more apparent to me. And my feeling always was yeah, tube sounds good, solid state sounds good. I wasn't really hearing anything that blew my mind at first. And it's also possible that I hadn't developed my audio palette enough at that point to hear the difference or want to hear the difference or even make an attempt to. I always felt that tubes emphasize the mid-range. I always felt that way. I've had friends that have owned tube amplifiers for a long time, and I'm pretty familiar with the sound of tube based on those experiences that go back 5, 6, 7, 8 years. The bulk of my tube experience before going to Ken's was with my friend's system. Guy named Ray from the Steve Hoffman Music Forums. He has Audio Note speakers and Audio Note kit monoblock amplifiers. He has an Audio Note preamplifier, and this is all tube gear. And I have a very distinct memory of hearing Saxophone Colossus on his system and feeling wow, the mid-range is very present and there is not as much bass as I wish there was. That was sort of the prevailing feeling I had about it. After that experience, and I kind of came home thinking, yeah, I don't know, tube would be cool, but I don't really know if I necessarily even like that sound. So I had no interest in pursuing tube at that point. I then encountered another friend's system who's actually local to Albany, and he uses tube. And with his stuff too, I didn't really feel wowed, oh my god, tube sounds amazing. And even this time at Ken's, I felt like it was a more characteristic tube sound. He had this really impressive tube amplifier and these super expensive coaxial speakers. Listening to that equipment, it really, I feel emphasized the tube coloring and texture and characteristics a lot more than my other experiences for whatever reason. I wrote about this on my blog recently, my visit, and how listening to a reissue on tube gear, it's weird, I'm kind of equating reissues with solid state and original pressings with tube for some reason. It's kind of a false equivalence. I definitely felt there was this aspect of the tube listening that it just felt more real to me. And I know a lot of reissue experts, see, here it is again, this weird false correlation between tubes and originals and solid state and reissues. Like, I was just about to say that Joe Harley, I know, has explained that he believes that the stereo presentation of the music, frankly, as a reissue, the way that he and Kevin Gray master them, you know, like that wide dynamic stereo, he feels like that's very realistic and very natural. And I totally get what he means and what people mean when they say they prefer reissues. I'm not talking tubes now, reissues. For that reason, I get it. At the same time, I'd argue that the original pressing on tube gear, it had a different kind of realism. It was just more direct and visceral and present. And I think that had to do with the emphasis on the mid-range. Anyways, I continued to think about it. Yeah, a week ago, I was at my friend Ray's again, checking out his audio note system. You know, we were just listening to a bunch of stuff that day, different kinds of music, some jazz. So when it got later and it got a little quieter and people were really sitting and focusing and listening carefully to what was being played, I pulled out this copy, this OJC reissue of Earthy on the Prestige label. And I really was completely taken aback by how lifelike it sounded. This is a reissue, you know, it's got a very clean, refined presentation to it. The playback was just very realistic, and let me try to explain what felt so realistic about it. That system that my friend had, it again emphasized the soloist, but the thing is that the soloists, especially the horn soloists, their instruments are dominantly in the mid-range. And I gotta be honest, for a while I didn't really fully understand what people meant by soundstage when I first got serious about collecting and audio and stuff like that. Now I totally get it. And Rudy Van Gelder was on record for, you know, explaining that, like, you know, even mono records can have a sense of a very big sense of soundstage if they're done well. And that's totally true. I mean, he recorded this record. What happened was those horn soloists, they really literally felt like they were in front of the rhythm section. And it was a beautiful, surreal kind of listening experience. Like and also there's just something about how that, and when the mid-range is emphasized like that, there's just something about how it feels great. It's very pleasing. It's like you feel like the artist is that much closer to you playing their horn. It's weird because, like, it feels like they're 10 feet away from you playing their horn, and maybe that's a little too close for a lot of people, but like I strongly prefer that sound. And there's lots of things you could do with the lack of bass in those situations. I mean, you know, my friend's system is not like bass heavy by any means. I think for a long time I was buying gear and picking out gear, you know, thinking that eventually I might want to listen to hip hop on my system. At this point, I'm pretty content with listening to hip hop in my studio, on my computer speakers, which are just these little audio engine things, in my car. I mean, maybe I'll listen to it out here in the living room sometimes, but I mean, at this point, I'm pretty committed to my living room, my main system being primarily geared to play jazz. You know, with jazz, I've never really been one to like really geek out on following the bass line and songs and stuff. I don't know if I ever will. I kind of feel like that's like an advanced jazz listener like move to like pay a lot of attention to the bass. Maybe I'll get there someday. Yeah, so I don't really place a lot of emphasis on the bass in my listening experience. That said, I did recently get a Blue Note Black B reissue stereo, not Van Gelder stamped, and it was seriously lacking in bass so much that I'm going to be selling it actually. So, you know, it's not like bass is not important to me, but it's not primary. I think what I'm trying to say in so many words is that I really have come to value that emphasis on the mid-range. And I've felt that way, I think, for a long time without really thinking about it much. For example, it's been about 10 years now since I bought my headphones. They're Audio-Technica ATH M50Xs, I believe. I remember I listened to lots of different headphones. I auditioned lots of headphones at that time. And the pair I went for was the most even sounding to me. Too often, headphones have like a scoop EQ especially they crank up the bass unnaturally. While the Audio-Technicas were maybe a little light on bass, lighter than I would like, I definitely preferred that to the overhyped bass of a lot of the other headphones I was trying on. So the search began, but really the search had began a couple years ago when I actually found this beautiful integrated tube amplifier that I was pretty sure that if I ever got into tube that I would want to go in this direction. It's the Luxman, I believe it's SQ-N150. You know, it's a modern tube amp, it's 10 watts per channel. For some reason you can get it a lot cheaper direct from Japan on eBay. I don't really know why. Once I realized that, I was like, maybe I can afford this actually. And in the process of trying to sort out what I was going to do for amplification, I actually spent, and this was before last week, I was thinking about this since I left Ken's. I was talking to my friend Jacob Weinstein, who's a tube expert, total tube nut. He was and has been continued to try to heavily talk me into going vintage. Yesterday I just even told him, you know, I finally decided that I wasn't going to go the vintage route. I've been buying audio gear for, you know, like studio audio gear and listening audio gear for, you know, a couple decades now. And I've had my fair share of difficulties with vintage equipment. I've had enough difficulties where I'm at a point now where I'm like, yeah, I'm not really ready to go this route. I mean, the only way I would do it probably is if I could go and audition all the equipment and it was insanely clean and a fair price, you know, cheap enough for me. If I could do all that and all the boxes were checked and I knew it was serviced, then I would consider it. But that situation is not something that is like very easily accessible to me. And, you know, Jacob lives down in Georgia. He knows this guy who is really heavy into all the vintage like coaxial and horn speakers and stuff. And he's in Virginia, you know, so I was thinking about driving down there this summer, but I just decided against it. I just decided that it was going to be tough. I was pretty close to actually getting a mono Heathkit amplifier from Jacob and pairing it with an Electro Voice vintage speaker with a original cabinet. I just decided I wasn't going to do it. And he continued to try to talk me into like other options like Dynakit, you know, Altec. You know, I'd love to have the Altecs, you know, the ones like Rudy Van Gelder had, like the 604C, the 604E, like a beautiful vintage pair of those. But they are expensive. But I was very tempted though, because I did find a couple of blogs, audio blogs online of people who did have vintage setups with like, with Altecs and like custom enclosures. And they are so beautiful. I mean, like they look amazing on these websites. And like I was just like, man, yeah, that's what I want. That's what I want to do. But for a lot of reasons, I'm getting away from that. I mean, for one, the current apartment Akko and I, my wife, we live in, the living room's not super huge, and I really can't see myself having two colossal Altecs in this room right here. Maybe in the future when when we buy a house, I can have a room dedicated to listening and I could do it there, but it's just not practical here. So anyways, I gave up on that idea, and all along I'm thinking, okay, well what about that Luxman amp, and what kind of new modern speakers could I pair with that kind of a Luxman amp, 10 watts per channel? I guess I always kind of knew just from vaguely hearing people talk about it that you needed special speakers for tube amplifiers, and I always assumed that was because the wattage of tube amps is so low, but I didn't understand which ones and why. And Jacob did a lot to school me on this, and eventually it became very clear to me that, you know, what you're looking for in a speaker to pair with a low wattage tube amplifier like this Luxman integrated is speakers with high efficiency, or the other word that's used is sensitivity. So I believe that my Wharfdales over here, my Denton 80th anniversaries, I believe they're like 85 or 86 decibels sensitivity. And like, I guess speakers that are good to pair with low wattage tube amplifiers are at bare minimum 90 decibels sensitivity. And I think you're actually looking to get closer to 95 and up. And I always wondered, like, well, why is that? And also, why is there such a big difference between like 85 decibels sensitivity and 90 decibel sensitivity. And I don't have it down to a perfect science, but I think the rating is based on per 1 watt at 1 meter. The way it works is that it's an exponential curve, right? Okay, that's how I understand it. And anyways, that's why in my mind it makes sense that there's such a huge difference between 85 and 90 and 90 and 95 decibel sensitivity. And the other thing that I figured out is that amplification wattage is a logarithmic curve, right? So what happens is in the first watt, you gain a ton of volume, and then doubling your wattage gives you another 6 decibels of volume, I'm pretty sure is how it is. So the first watt, you get a ton of volume. And then the second watt, you're actually doubling, so you still get a ton of volume. But then you gotta go to 4 watts to add 6 decibels. And then from 4 watts, you gotta go all the way to 8 watts to add 6 more decibels. So once you get up to like 50, 60, 80 watts, like you have to start adding lots of power to get increases in volume. The last piece of the puzzle is like, well, why did they do this? Why did they do it differently back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and why is it different now? And what I learned was back in the old days, it was much more cost efficient to build lower wattage amplifiers. So basically wattage was very costly for companies. Building high wattage amplifiers was very costly. So in order to get more volume out of systems, what you would do is in reverse, you would make the speakers bigger and louder, basically higher sensitivity. So basically they needed less power to make them move just as much as a modern system with a lot of power. Modern speakers will need a lot of power to move just as much. That to me at this point makes perfect sense, and that was always a mystery to me. So I was looking around, and the first easiest brand to reach for was Klipsch. They have kind of continued in this tradition of building high sensitivity speakers for, assumedly for tube amplifiers. It's pretty common for audiophiles to go for tube. Not everybody does. I mean, you know, I've got a couple of friends who have a lot of experience with gear and stuff, and they're actually doing solid state. And I think the main reason they do solid state is because they really want that bass emphasis in their playback. You know, they want that deep bass. So Klipsch, I guess, you know, they make speakers that are kind of for tube amplifiers. And I was looking at their stuff, I was looking at the Heresies, and they're horn speakers. I'm not crazy about how they sit so low on the floor at this point. I don't know, I should probably try to hear them at some point though before I count them out. They're also kind of expensive. Klipsch does make a very affordable high sensitivity option. I considered those for a hot second, but then I quickly decided, nah, I'm not really into that modern look of speaker. So I kept looking around, and then my friend had recommended to me Zoo Audio and Omega. And I looked at the Zoo Audios, and I didn't really love the cosmetics of those. But I really, really like the look of these Omega speakers. And apparently they're, the guy who was in charge of the company, whose company it is, his name's Louis, I believe. Apparently he's in Connecticut, so I'm actually just reached out to him, and I'm hoping that I can get in touch with him and maybe audition his speakers. His speakers are kind of like coaxials. I guess they're called Whizzer Cone. Jacob explained to me that they are based on this older style of Jensen full range speaker. To be honest, the speakers themselves look very basic. They look like something you'd buy at Radio Shack in the 90s or something that costed like $10 each. But these are proprietary, and Omega makes them specially. They're very high sensitivity. Well, they're high sensitivity. And in terms of like audiophile speakers made for tube amplifiers, like these are very cheap and they're very affordable. They're definitely by far the most expensive speakers I will ever buy if I get them. So that's sort of where I'm at with thinking about redoing my setup. It's definitely a luxury to do this. If I went the Omega route, especially one of the cheaper routes, I probably wasn't going to have a lot of bass, but I don't really have a ton of bass as it is with these. I mean, I'm very impressed with how much bass there is with these speakers, and I would say it's enough for me, but more wouldn't hurt. I mean, but I live in an apartment building right now, and you know, I'm not necessarily trying to disturb my neighbors with my music. So again, maybe when I buy a house, you know, that might be a time to beef up the bass in my system, maybe add a subwoofer, make it a 2.1 system, or maybe get new speakers. But for now, you know, I think a system with a little less bass is not really that big of an issue. What I'd like to do is maybe audition different speakers with this Luxman amplifier and try and find a pair that sounds really good with it. So that's where I'm at with that. I'd be happy to keep everybody posted on where I end up with my system changes. The other confession for today would be that, you know, there really isn't anything wrong with my system as it is. And I mean, ironically, this is all happening just as I bought a new solid state amplifier. I'm happy with it, you know, it sounds fine. I just feel like my setup as it is, it's very neutral. It does its job, it plays the music. You know, I feel like a tube system with speakers designed for tube, you know, this kind of whizzer cone speaker, or maybe a coaxial in the future or something, you know. I just feel like there's more character, it's just got more personality. It just feels like it makes the listening experience that much more engaging and more interesting to me at this point. I'm gonna give it a try. I mean, like, I don't know, we'll see. Am I gonna feel like it's worth it in the end? I don't know, maybe I won't, but I wanna try. All right, well, this was a longer confession. Thanks for watching very much, and I will see you next time.